and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's juggle the agenda a little bit to give Chris a chance to talk. Why don't you, Maureen, take the lead, because you just came out of the meeting.
Yeah, so we're going to start with going through an analysis that we conducted on Park Mobile's contracts. So the City of Cape May currently has a contract with Park Mobile. That is the parking app, for those of you who are familiar with it. And we've had this contract since April of '22. We have been looking at some of the contract terms and have decided through that analysis that we wanted to reopen up a bid to evaluate potentially other vendors for parking apps. But prior to doing that, one of the things that the mayor charged us with doing was to try and take a look at our contract and comparing it with the other municipalities in the Cape May County region. Park Mobile is, for those of you who don't know, but many are very familiar, this is a very broadly based application vendor, fairly predominant throughout the country. And it is utilized in all of our neighboring municipalities, with the exception of Avalon, who does not does not charge for parking. So through Erin in the clerk's office, she was able to obtain for us all of the contracts from the other municipalities, and we did a review of the contract length, the fees that they charged, end user fees, and I'll talk about that in a minute, our opt-out dates, and the right to update fees. What I would say in summary from the review that we did was that this was very interesting. We thought that the contracts would be fairly cookie cutter, and what we found out was that there was a lot of variability just in these 7 contracts, with one vendor operating in a very small geographic market. The contract terms for the client fee, so the client fee is what we pay, the city pays. And so that varied from being in full receipt of all parking-related revenue. Some had their parking revenue minus the end-user fee, so the actual municipality was paying part of the end-user fees. But the most interesting thing was the differences in the end-user fees. And some of this, we believe, just through observation, came about because of the time frame when the municipality first entered into the contract. So early adopters had looked to appear to have better terms.
They're the only ones that do this stuff. Nobody else does a new business deal versus.
Well, it's interesting, Russ, I've never seen a vendor that this large have such variability in their terms. It really was very surprising when I did it, and I sent my first review to Steve and Marty. I said, please take a look at this, because I'm just shocked. Everything else was fairly cookie cutter in the rest of the language, but it really was an enlightening exercise. One of the things that we did agree would be that we are going to share this back with the other municipalities, because they were very interested in, and it was one of the things that was requested, and we said certainly we would do so. So that's the comparative, and I think that this certainly gives us a couple of key findings and sort of recommendations, and that was the second document. The variability we talked about, the fact that it includes differences in end user and client fees, notification provisions for increasing of fees. So some of them had mutual and some of them were more unilateral in their language, meaning that Park Mobile had the ability to increase them with really no provision notices.
So just so I'm clear, none
Sure.
of the other municipalities in South Jersey use anybody but Park Mobile?
Well, we did not go beyond the county. And
Last time we found that there were about 5 vendors
Right.
that do it statewide, but not down in Cape May County.
Right. And there's positive and negatives to that. So one of the things from a positive is, could there be the opportunity to do a master county-wide contract so that everyone would benefit for better terms and contract? The challenges with that is that not everyone has an expiration date or an opt-out date that aligns. 3 of the municipalities, including Cape May, would be able to, and then an additional 3 expiring in 2025. So it could be that we would, enter into contract negotiations if the other municipalities were interested, and have language that said anyone could be added on to a master contract, at a future date and time, should they desire to do so. That may come as a result of us sharing this analysis with the other municipalities. We do feel that any contracts, regardless of the vendor, unequivocally have to state the city receives all parking-related revenue, all fees that are associated with the administration of software or processing of transactions, credit cards, and otherwise, our end user, meaning the person who's selecting to park, would bear those costs. And one of the reasons for this is because transaction fees from credit card companies and what they're calling emerging payments, Venmo and those kinds of things, are ever changing in the market, and are not something we necessarily can control. But, the parking expense, the revenue, the city does want in full. And the vendor who has these associated expenses, more so in line with their ability to control their business, is not something, we would want to have taken out of our revenue. We do think that this provides us, having done this analysis, with a strong negotiating position for any vendor that we choose to, whether or not we remain with Park Mobile based on the bid, or whether or not there's another vendor that comes. We now have an idea of what the market will bear with regard to contract terms. So I think from that perspective, this was also a very good exercise. So that's what I wanted to report on just the review of the current contracts. Now, the resolution for opening up the bid for a vendor is not scheduled to be due back until the 24th of this month, and then at that time, we may know who has responded and is interested in offering the proposal to the city based on the conditions and terms of the bid. Are there any questions?
Can you look at this chart and just kind of give me a sense of who's got the best deal on there?
Well,
Dennis, there's an inflection point in the contracts, pre-2022, post-2022, where from reading the contracts, it appears to me that Park Mobile changed their business model. So it was the introduction of this client fee that was unique to the newer contracts that didn't appear in the older ones. So the older ones don't have that client fee, where the newer ones all do. The question is, who pays the client fee? Is it being charged and paid by the municipality, or is it being charged and paid by the end user? All right. So I will also draw your attention to the last line on the page, where that's the most recent contract, and that particular contract went from 30-cent end user fee to a 65-cent end user fee in one shot.
well, and Marty, I did not update, I'm sorry, Marty, I did not update this, but I do believe, I recall that Ocean City has been notified that theirs is going up to 55 cents for the upcoming season.
Sure, an increase, I think, is
Yeah,
expected.
yeah.
More than doubling
Yeah.
is unusual.
Yeah.
So there's something.
And that's to my point, that the transaction fees that they're paying for the credit card and other applications, which is really outside of our area of expertise or our ability to negotiate or have any influence, really is not something that, we as the client should having to bear, because it's undetermined at any point in time. So to Marty's point, Dennis, it really looks like the earlier ones had the better deal to start with.
But if you look at the Stone Harbor one, that looks like it's the latest, because it's got the biggest opt-out date.
But CL was amended 3/23.
Yeah, so a lot of them have either a one-year contract that just evergreens, some were 2, some were 3. That was also, a little bit of difference too.
So my question is, so I'm clear, so we don't know, or we do know, that the client fee, and I assume the client fee meaning the person that's parking their car.
No, the client fee is the
Right.
city. We are the
We're the
client,
client.
The
yes.
end
So-
user is the park.
So right now, if I park a car,
Yapakaka.
Could I pay something other than, I mean, could it potentially, could you charge the person that's parking the car more, and therefore make it more competitive for the city?
So that's my guess, that's what happened in the most recent negotiation, was
Because
they
to
didn't
me-
want a client fee.
Yeah.
So they passed the client fee on to the end user by more than doubling the fee.
Right.
Yeah, and I, from my perspective, if we're trying to discourage parking to a certain extent, I think we should certainly consider that as an option. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but why wouldn't we consider that as an option?
Well, and that's the cost of them doing business, keeping in mind. I mean, the end user fee is the cost of the software application.
Right.
It's the cost of the transactions from the credit card company or the emerging pay. I mean, really, that is the cost of Park Mobile doing business. The city's looking to recoup the revenue associated with parking, but we don't have any control over any of those expenses or the ability. And in some instances, as you can see all the way to the right, some of it, they can unilaterally make changes to those fees, and we're not really,
Well, I'm not, that also surprises me. Most contracts, you would negotiate when they could make changes to pricing.
it seems in this instance, for this vendor, and
What
again,
about?
very
What
surprising.
about Cape May's contract? How'd that work?
It's on here. It's
No,
the
I mean,
first one.
couldn't they unilaterally?
Unilateral, yes.
They can unilaterally change the
Yeah.
price. So the other question I have for you is, I do think we should consider, and hopefully other municipalities agree, a county-wide one. And the way to handle ones that don't expire the same date is that they agree that they would.
Yeah, they come on at the time,
and-
or,
And
yeah.
that would
right,
give you the maximum
Right, right.
leverage, it would seem,
Yeah.
in any
Yeah.
negotiation with any vendor.
Right.
Let's just back up a minute. Our task originally was to research the field
Mm-hmm.
and advise the council on what the lay of the land looks like. And
Well,
the
there were
bids-
two-
the Bids are now
No,
out.
so there were two components. The first component was this, to review our current Park Mobile contracts.
I was getting to that.
Yeah. The second one is when the bids come back in. Now, this is sort of, I say, we could want to do business with anybody. If they don't respond to the bid, that's very problematic, because they may not want to meet the conditions or don't want to enter into it. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind, that making a change for this, for an upcoming season, has huge operational implications and potentially PR issues. We are going from using a well-known app utilized in 6 other municipalities locally, to trying to introduce it to a whole new population all over again. So something that needs to be considered and part of in the pros and cons list. Even though you may have a very attractive offer, the ability to make sure that we're marketing, that we're going with a new vendor, and having all of the infrastructure. We all know the Stone Harbor debacle this past summer. We've got to be prepared for that, and that takes planning, good PR, marketing, and on the ground boots.
No, it's a fair point. Well,
And
but
I
just
don't think we know
because-
that yet.
Just because Park Mobile might be our preferred vendor at the end of the day, if they're willing, if they're reasonably competitive, doesn't mean, however, and you're not saying this,
Mm-hmm.
that you shouldn't put it out to bid,
No, and which we have done.
because that's
Yeah.
when you have your maximum leverage.
Right, right.
They'd have their maximum leverage if they knew up front that
Right.
we
But
were
all the issues you just
reluctant to change.
wound up covering, that's council's bailiwick.
Yeah,
Where MTRAC basically has at this point done what was asked to do.
that is correct. The rest, when it comes to an analysis of the vendor, whether or not they have the capacity and specifications that we feel would be adequate,
It falls on the city manager. and
yes,
the council.
yeah.
Okay.
So this really was, I would say, really our charge, Dennis. And I do think, and thanks Marty and Steve for, their eyes on it. Because when I first, again, I started just looking at the contract terms, these gentlemen pulled in other pieces of information. But I think it's highlights that we do have an opportunity
Yeah,
in our
I-
negotiations.
So MTRAC is not going to give any recommendations as to some of the options that ought to be considered by the city manager?
Well, until we get the bid back, Russ, I can't really opine on that. We might wind up only having one vendor respond. So there,
No, I wasn't saying that, but in terms of suggesting to the city manager that certain components should be considered in the bid itself.
Well, I think that's part of what we tried, well, the bid's already gone out, so the specifications were already defined. Yeah, and so I think what MTRAC may want to consider recommending is in this key findings, that we want to see contract terms that unequivocally, outline, some of the considerations that we've put forth, which is making sure that parking revenue returns to the city, any of the terms that need to be covered from a business standpoint, transactions are on the part of the vendor in the application. And again, underlining this is, I do believe, a component that says, even though someone may come in with a better offer, is it the right, opportunity? We may consider it, but we may want to consider whether or not we do it for the upcoming 24 season or after, just based on the timing, because we're only going to get the bid specs back end of January, right,
Well, that's a
Chris?
good point.
And then we're going to start in, any kind of contract. It may be, sort of a little bit of a tight window. But I don't know that we can answer any of that until we get that back.
And I think in the
separate-
meantime, that we want to also be talking to the other municipalities,
Oh, that's
as
what I was
well
gonna
as
say. Yeah.
lessons learned from Stone Harbor specifically.
Well, so again, we're going to share this. Erin will share it back with the city clerks in the other municipalities. And that may engender some conversations, and I'll, let Chris take the lead on that. But I think certainly once others take a look at this, it might provide us with an opportunity to have a conversation.
And when those conversations take place, Steve and Marty will kind of be a resource for other towns because
Well-
they've done this research.
Well, we all three did this
Yeah.
research, yeah. But I think it's pretty black and white. I think Chris understands it, too.
Yeah, and when they take a look at this, the exercise was beneficial because it showed us what the range was among the different towns. But also, as Maureen said, it's not one cookie cutter contract for all. It looked that way, but when you go through, there's some significant issues that are going to jump out to anybody, whether we recommend it or not. I think when it is negotiated, it's going to be looked at to say, hey, the right to update fees, that's a critical issue that really should be addressed. And we don't just have to, if they say we want to unilaterally be able to update the fees, we can turn around to say, no, we know you've negotiated with other towns to provide a different clause.
That's
We can
probably the
point
most
to
You
that.
say
important part to
unilaterally, I assume they can only do it on renewal date, like April of '23.
Well,
Annual.
That's what I say,
Yeah,
April
right.
23, April 24, April 25. They can't unilaterally mid-year do it.
Can they unilaterally change the end user rates?
They can unilaterally update what they determine to be those
Yeah.
fees. So
From
the
a
answer-
bu-
the answer
And
to
from a
that is
business
yes.
standpoint, at any time.
Yes.
Because we don't necessarily know what that is either, correct?
Well, it's the cost of doing business. That's what they would
Mary,
argue.
one of the points that I did notice when we were doing the review is the 40 cents per transaction in Wildwood and Wildwood Crest was negotiated in 2014 and 2015. Park Mobile has had the right to unilaterally increase them, and that wouldn't be reflected in the contracts that we reviewed. So we have a follow-up, maybe even just going to a parking meter and putting putting our numbers in, okay, which is what I did to figure out how things worked. They may be higher than that. They may have been increased over the course
Well,
of that
that's what I'm saying.
8-year
And,
period, yep.
Again, from a municipality, I would think you would still want to understand what they're charging our end
Right.
users as well, whether that's good or bad, as Russ is saying.
Right.
If we're looking to discourage parking versus encouraging.
Yeah.
you'd want
No,
to-
we still want to know, yeah. It's the issue of what kind of influence you have.
Well, did we have an increase on 423? Because this contract was effective 422.
We did not.
No.
So the contract has stayed the same. Okay.
Answer that. The answer to that's no. The contract provides there are fee increases, but they got to give notice in advance of the calendar year for budgetary purposes.
And it would be effective on April 1st, right? Whatever they do.
Well, it's effective prior to January 1 of the year in which a fee increase is sought. So if they haven't given one now, I'd say you're too late for 2024, and we haven't received one.
That's what
Right. And just to confirm, a broken microphone. the bid specifications, just so you're all aware of it, on this topic, the bid specifications are framed to the city's going to evaluate the bids received based on the concept that the fees will be shifted to the end user as a convenience fee for using that service. So the goal is, if we charge $1 for parking per hour, the city should get $1 for parking per hour back, and there shouldn't be a deduction, and then we get a net back. But the city's going to evaluate the competitiveness of those fees charged, because we don't want just some confiscation fee that's going to deter people from coming here. So that's built into the RFP, is that's all that's going to be taken into consideration, price and other factors.
Because and the other part of my question is, if we find out that other municipalities are willing to work with us to have a larger contract with Park Mobile, is that something that then would require a brand-new bid, or you could amend what you've already sent out?
Probably have to do something new at that point.
Okay.
So I think what council wanted to do is evaluate for, the upcoming year, whether there's more competitive options. And this exercise of getting the other contracts was definitely valuable information. And it's good to have going into evaluation of whatever bids we receive.
It's good to know you don't have an increase for 2 years now, though, 423 and 424.
Yeah, I would say they're too late on that if they tried to notice anything at this point.
What would be the opt-out date for this bidded contract?
So it does provide a 3-year term. But frankly, there have been some issues with Park Mobile that have caused the city to evaluate other options at this point. I'm not going to go into detail on
Okay.
that, but that's the reason for it.
And how many, I'm trying to go back in my memory bank here. I think we have 1,100 coin-operated parking meters and about 400 Park Mobile stations. Is that about right?
I don't know the exact numbers on that, Dennis, actually.
Park Mobile Stations?
We don't have Park Mobile stations.
No, we don't, you don't.
You mean the kiosks?
We don't have the
The
kiosks.
kiosk.
The kiosks were removed.
Oh.
And that came about because of issues with that particular vendor, the maintenance associated with them. So now we have meters and Park Mobile as our two
Okay,
options,
all
okay?
I don't think
That's
any of them are coin-only, so there, you can use
Yeah.
Park Mobile on all of them.
All the
There are a
meters.
small number of Park Mobile only. I know of some in front of the Rusty Nail, for example. There is no coin operated in those new spaces in front of
So
the Rusty Nail.
every meter in town is available to the Park Mobile
Yes.
system, all right?
When are you getting the bids back?
I think the 24th.
Good luck.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? No? Good. Thanks, Chris. You can stick for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. That takes care of the Park Mobile business. Martin, can you quickly go over your letter? I think it's a good job. Everybody was pretty much on board last time, but are we all set to go with it?
Thank you. Yes, so I think everyone has seen the letter, and I did receive input from the city solicitor, which I incorporated into the footnote at the bottom, where we specifically
Saw that.
spell out what the insurance obligations are. My training is that since we're not lawyers, we don't do that, but since it's in the ordinance, I felt comfortable doing that. If the law changes, we would need to make sure that we change that language. So on an annual basis, we just need to make sure that that footnote stays current. Other than that, the focus of last year's letter was on the insurance change. It was an opportunity for us to educate the population about the fact that they would have to provide a copy of their declaration page. This year, the focus is more on, hey, folks, let's not forget that it is your obligation to obtain a license for your property. And we introduced the fact in the letter that, as the statutes contain, there are late fees and fines associated with noncompliance. We're not necessarily planning to do anything along those lines, but we have the right to do so.
Okay. Logistics of it all set up to be,
Yes, so we've reviewed it with our new city manager, and of course, he reminded me that I need a new letterhead, which I already did know, but I'll make sure that we incorporate that. Following this meeting, I'll send this to Erin for inclusion with the February water bills, and she'll provide to Deb.
Good,
She's also on board. She did give us input that the letter looks good.
good, great, thanks.
Sure.
Any questions on that? Anybody? Okay. How about the local sales tax issue? Chris, I asked you to look at that proposal that we had, just to give an idea of the legality of it.
Sure, Mr. Crowley, there is a Supreme Court case actually on the constitutionality of that provision, and it was upheld.
It was.
So it's out there, it's an option, but, I mean, as a policy matter, it's just something that I think if you all want to.
Right, no, I get it. And the issue hanging over our head last time was, is this even doable? Because it was so, I guess, stale in terms of its birth date.
The two main things I looked at in response to you reaching out to me on it was, one, enforceability, and then two, implementation. And one, there's a Supreme Court case out on that.
Okay.
It's almost as old as that law. But the second thing is the implementation of that. I couldn't find any, and I don't think you could find any case of that being deployed. We have the transient and hotel occupancy taxes that have gone into place, and many towns have utilized them, and that's great because it acts as sort of mailbox money for each town
Right.
on an annual basis. But this is different and has you designating an enforcement agent to go out and collect it, and that that creates its own set of implementation issues, and that may be an explanation for why you don't see it down the coast. So I looked into that, tried to find some examples out there that might provide some direction, or maybe just a plain example of this in practice, and I was unable to find anything.
Okay.
But, Dennis, now, this isn't across the board,
No, it's not.
This is specified different items, right? Like, you know what I mean?
It does target individual elements of commerce. It also, I think, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, it also limited the use of the money to certain things.
Yeah, there are some,
What would that be?
It was something like tourist-related services connected with convention halls and other tourist
Well, that's all right.
activities.
I mean, that would make sense
Yeah,
logically.
yeah.
I think the implications also from the implementation standpoint, accounting for this, both on the business side as well as, in City Hall, et cetera. I mean, this is,
Right, and we had
I'm
talked
just
last.
curious, that's all. Just curious as to what,
it makes sense that it would only be, it should be targeted for a tourist-related activity.
Yeah.
Or in some way.
Exactly, and that's what our thinking was last time when we discussed this, and that is that this money is not to go to the general fund. It would be, if we did it, it would be only dedicated to certain elements that strengthen and provide tourist services and strengthen the tourism industries. I think that's what we talked about.
So Dennis, I did find that Atlantic City has a 9% luxury tax
yeah.
that they impose on certain rental sales and services within Atlantic City, with the exception of alcoholic beverages sold by the drink, which are subject to a rate of 3%. Also, Cape May County has a tourism sales tax of 2%, predominantly related in addition to the state sales tax. Businesses in Wildwood, Wildwood Crest, and North Wildwood are required to collect the tourism sales tax.
I was going to mention that because that's the way Wildwood was given a special piece of legislation to create that funding source in order to fund and operate the
Convention hall.
Convention hall.
Yeah.
And so that was a unique one-off just for Wildwood, and I think Atlantic City.
So I'm not saying that they're using the law that we've
No,
identified
they're
to
using
do
the
that, but they are doing it
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah,
So we wouldn't be first.
yeah, that's true. We wouldn't be first. We would be first for this one, but not first for
Right.
the concept of dedicated tourism
Yes.
revenues, all right? Anything else, Chris?
nothing to add. It's a policy call for
Right.
you all to make a recommendation for
Okay.
council to consider.
All right, well, we have that hurdle removed from our discussion. We could discuss it at our next meeting, I guess, right? All right, thanks, Chris.
Permission to leave?
Permission granted. Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks.
staying.
See you later.
Before we go much further, does anybody in the public want to come up and talk? Anybody interested in saying something? Or offering some suggestions?
The observation, here for the observation? Okay.
Okay,
All right, great.
Mike?
all right. Shared services. Anything to report?
Of course. So we just held an in-depth meeting with our new city manager and with our CFO and with the city solicitor to re-review the recommendations and findings from the study last summer and fall. And so we took them through the material. I think there was general consensus that our recommendations are solid and are implementable. Others share if they feel differently. We're ready to go to council with this. We should be going to council because it is a change. We believe a positive change, but a change. And we're targeting the February 6th meeting.
February 6th?
So if you're in agreement, we would provide the copy of the document to the city clerk and request to be put on the agenda.
Okay, great. Now, do you have a copy of the final
Yes.
document? Circulate that around the committee.
Sure.
All right.
I was going to say, the final one wasn't circulated, was it?
No.
So the final one is the first one and the second one that I presented here mashed together.
Gotcha.
Right, yeah.
And plus, the concept of the hybrid fee, if you remember
Yep,
that,
yep,
okay,
yep.
that we discussed is a part of the final proposal because the committee felt it should be.
Perfect, as usual.
Okay, great. Any other questions on that? No? Good. Let's see. Let me pass this out. I always,
I'm sorry, Dennis, just one follow-up. So I'll send it to the committee, but should I also send it to you and to Aaron, request to be put on the agenda? Is
Yeah.
that helpful?
Yeah.
I'll do that, and I'll copy you.
Can you copy
Okay.
me, Mark?
Of course.
this was the redraft. This was a document from, we originally discussed this back in August, and this was our checklist of things that we've done and whether or not they've happened. And I set it up so that the colored blocks are things that we have recommended that have not yet been done for whatever reason. And when I say on the agenda, council reminders, what I'd like to do is figure out a way for the committee to bring back up these 6 items to the attention of the committee, of the council, because they were well-reasoned and very productive. We thought they were helpful, and we'd like to see them either moving or reasons for why they're not moving. In particular, the recommendation on the broad-based fee increases and the 2-year automatic adjustment, I feel that should be in ordinance draft form and before the council as soon as possible, because they're putting the budget together. And the budget's not due till March, so they have a couple of months.
But these were all presented to council,
Yeah, everything down through,
But I thought 1 or 2 of them, council said no.
everything down through 13 has been presented to the council.
But you're saying you don't think the council even got back to us or said, no, I don't want to take.
I haven't heard anything about whether or not they're going to be moving on them. Maureen, could
Well,
you
the
give us some
low-speed
of that?
vehicles, I don't know whatever happened, that just died a natural death.
What's that?
The low-speed vehicles.
Low-speed vehicle?
Well, I mean,
There was
I put a pamphlet together
had a
myself.
pamphlet together.
Yeah.
Nothing ever
But
happened.
not the sticker.
That was not the
sticker
sticker, no.
Sticker never
I
happened.
can't, yeah,
Let's walk through the colored blocks.
It was a
and see what-
supply issue.
yeah, and you know, I'm not going to be able to answer
No.
these. Fiscal impact analysis on proposed resolution and ordinances.
Yeah. No,
What does that translate to?
That was early on.
that was early on.
I was going to say, I don't even know what that is.
I'll
Okay.
I think, Maureen, you were
I'll give you a
part
brief
of
summary.
that.
I was
What did-
twinkle in an eye.
What it was a recommendation that we do what the state legislature does. When the legislature introduces a bill, if it has a fiscal impact, it has to get a fiscal note. In other words, how much is this going to cost us to implement it? It's a new thing. We're not doing it now. Are we going to have to spend more money to do it properly? And that was something that we had suggested, like you say early on, that it prevents loading up the administrative services element of our town with new jobs that they're not getting paid for, they're not getting funded for. And that results in understaffing, and in particular, things like code enforcement, which is understaffed, but it's getting better. The point is, when the policymakers adopt a new policy in form of an ordinance, they have to be cognizant of the fact that it's going to cost something to do. Or,
I understand the
and a fiscal impact note could also say there is no fiscal impact.
yeah, I understand, yeah, thank you for the explanation, Dennis. I can't speak to this because I don't recall what ordinance this was associated with. Going on to the next one, I think that this has been a subject that has been up and down the street many, many times.
Yep.
The fact of the matter is, there was some discussions with state legislatures and, and representatives, and I don't think that there's been any forward movement on that, and I can't speak to, I was not privy or part of those conversations, but I do know that those conversations were had.
And the council jumped on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dennis, I'm not sure that one's fair to say that council didn't move forward. Council
it's
did
not.
move
No, I
forward.
don't.
Yeah, they did make the
They
act.
did adopt a resolution.
That's my point. This
right.
really isn't council. This is, maybe rather than that color, be a different color. This is really up to this is really in the state,
Yeah.
state or federal
Yeah,
hands,
state or
not
federal.
council.
Right, yeah.
Red, white, and blue.
Yeah. I think last year, and I can only speak to this in my involvement, we put together the pamphlet,
Yeah,
met with every single company. We have those pamphlets getting produced for distribution this year. We will send them out to the companies. I asked for the city clerk to put them in the beach tag office, so that when people are coming in to get their beach tags, they're seeing them front and center. I don't know beyond that what, decision was made or not made, as whether or not they felt that there was efficacy in having rentals and agreements or tags on them, and what the infrastructure needs
Yeah.
would
Well,
be to be.
Yeah, I
I
thought
think
we
there
were
is also
self-tagged.
a cost associated with
local
doing
people,
business with
residents
those
here get a
vehicles,
free
especially
tag,
those
right?
outside of
Yeah.
KMA.
Right, and there's very few of those, Mary.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, only having met with all the businesses, so.
Maureen, do you have any sense about LSV usage in 2023 versus prior years? Is it growing?
No, I mean,
little? Is it
I would-
growing rapidly?
I would say that there, and this is just feedback from Chief Fashall and his team. They did see an increase. They were doing more educational stops and making sure people were aware. And speaking with the businesses, they were very supportive and in tune with making sure, any pamphlet, fine, all of their own paperwork they shared with us was, covered all of these issues, felt the pamphlet was one more way to do it.
So the registration issue was about revenue for the city to compensate us for the fact that LSV do create expense for the city. That was the part that that the city didn't move forward, was
Right.
the
Right,
revenue aspect.
because that was a decision whether or not we were going to start,
And
having.
we did take out, we made it a lot more palatable by taking out other vehicles or other bikes and other things. So we made it so it was just low-speed
Right.
vehicles.
Yeah, but I don't, and I cannot speak to whether or not council is, interested in charging those businesses for doing business.
I could see where it would help the police if there was a problem with one of them.
And I have to say, to be honest with you, Bob, that was not what I heard when, most of it was stopping, just, there might have been some education piece. That's really what's been going on in the last 2 years. And so there hasn't been, at least, my conversations with Chief Fashall is, they're not seeing that this is a huge issue or a problem.
Well,
So I
I
can't
think
speak to.
the biggest problem, I think that, from what I hear from a close close person, is that younger kids don't get strapped in those things. There's no, and I know my grandson said he stops plenty of them and
Yeah.
tells them, hey,
Right.
you got to either walk the kid home or something. You can't ride around. And that's a state law.
Right, and that's the education piece, and that's covered in the pamphlet.
But I think if you've checked with the court clerk, they probably never wrote a summons for it, but they're well within their power to do it.
Right, so I can't speak to how they execute on,
I mean, if anything, wouldn't we want to handle that the same way that, the police department is now handling the bike issue, that, if it's continued, they keep seeing it happening, I think they were.
Well, that's what I'm
started
saying.
issuing a summons.
If they stop one of these vehicles and they call in the registration or however they want
Right.
to do it, or the tag number if we issue tags, and if it happens again, then I think the cops should write them up.
well, and
Probably gonna be a rental.
By the way, I don't mean to put you in the defense.
No, the only reason this subject I happen to know a little bit, what Chief Fashal said is and the businesses said the same, if you have an issue and you stop something, they want to know.
Yep.
Because that really is in violation of the contract that this individual may be doing. So I think that in the last 2 years, we have seen an increase. I think, in my opinion, safety and education was at the forefront of this, and I continue to say that. We really just need to make sure that people, when utilizing these vehicles, understand that it is a vehicle, and they need to follow all of the guidelines in operating a vehicle. That means,
I think,
I agree with you.
Maureen, what you had passed out, I think was terrific, and I hope we redo it again this year to make sure they do it. The thing that strikes me, to Bob's point, because in our neighborhood, that's what I primarily see, not stopping at stop signs and kids underage, either infants.
Driving them.
Or driving the carts. And so, I mean, even if it wasn't a fee to the safety issue you talked about, because I agree with you, I think that's the biggest thing we're trying to prevent, is why not have something that is a little bit more obvious on the rental vehicles that say, no drivers under age, whatever, infants
and-
need a car seat. I
Yeah.
mean, something, I mean, if we know what the 2 or 3 biggest issues are, because the problem with the pamphlet.
Yeah.
You get
People
the
aren't reading
pamphlet,
I get it.
and you
yeah.
stick it in the glove
Right.
compartment.
Well, and I think we can talk to the vendors about that and see if they'd be interested in entertaining that. I mean, these are their vehicles. We can't necessarily impose,
No, I
staying
understand that.
But it is something we could say to them, like, listen, we know that these are the 1 or 2 issues.
Yeah.
Would you be agreeable to maybe
Focus
taking
on
a
the
look
issues
at?
that we know.
I think along Russell's lines, if they had like a sticker that, they could put right on the dashboard there. I think
Adhere
that
to
would-
all,
The
traffic.
education.
If you do it with painter's tape, it can be ripped off.
So Maureen, to your point that the vendors want to know if there's a problem.
Yep.
There's no way for
There's no way to know.
to know whose card it is, because there's no identification on it.
Sometimes there.
Oh,
But-
yeah, there
But,
is, yeah.
and I'm sure that we all agree that safety is the utmost priority when it comes to.
Right, right.
But we, as a committee, we were talking about these businesses paying for the right to do business in Cape May.
And Marty,
So
that's
if-
not
if we-
something, that's,
If we want to resurrect that issue with council.
It's not an issue I can
Then I think
address.
that is
Yeah.
appropriate to do.
Yeah.
council
The
did,
genesis of the.
council was aware of that
Okay.
recommendation,
So then it has been answered. So it's been rejected, is what we're saying.
I think the focus they took was the safety education.
Yes.
Yeah, one other consideration could be, and obviously you have to be concise with it, but we have those electronic signboards that tell us about like the road construction and things like that. I mean, the pamphlet is great, but it's good to have a constant reminder out there as well. And in particular, since they're all around town, particularly on Pittsburgh or Beach or, or on.
Yeah, well,
the
I can
chief- they
talk-
And they can move those as well.
Yeah, they can,
So
and I
if
can
there's an
talk-
area
Is
where.
there still a bicycle committee?
Yes, there is.
Yeah,
And-
my understanding is that the chief has always been very responsive if you call him up and say, look, there's an issue with
Yep.
people speeding in a certain area or vehicles in a certain area, to be vigilant and take
Yeah.
a look. So
And they're
they
going to
could
do a
something with
promotion on
some-
Facebook, and put more information out. We gave them out. The chamber had them in the Welcome Center. So again, my focus last year and why I put this forth was to make sure that, people understood to adhere to the safety guidelines, et cetera. Anything beyond that.
Really, from a committee perspective, ours is revenue, not
Yeah.
So Dennis,
safety.
from a housekeeping perspective, I would say ask and answer on this one. This is closed from an
revenue
MTRAC perspective.
Okay. All right. How about the next one?
I think we could remind council again.
Well, yeah, you know what,
I don't
Bob,
see any
you-
problem in that.
I don't think there is a problem with it either, because the genesis of that proposal was responsibilities are being placed on our municipal services, which are not funded properly. We look for a funding source, because enforcement and education are what we're talking about now.
It's a two-pronged thing, yeah.
But we're talking about that now, but that's impacting the town's resources.
What I would recommend, Dennis, is if all of these or any of these, if there are ones that you want council to be made top mind awareness once again, send this document and just put behind it a brief explanation as to, the origin date and the definition of it, and saying MTRAC would, for 2024 is asking for, council to be made aware these were prior recommendations. And if that's in front of us and given to Erin, and then she distributed and discussion with the mayor, then we have it.
Okay.
And those can be discussed in a closed session. If, if there's anyone who wants to say, well, let's get a little bit more details on that, then we can come back and ask for it. But at
Perhaps
least,
given the staffing issues that City Hall has experienced over the last, 18 months, there wasn't the appetite to impose new fees, new registrations. They just went through the short-term property rental mercantile thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot. There's
There's a lot to take
two
on.
people that work upstairs?
yeah, and that's
You're right there.
That's an excellent point. I mean, these are great opportunities for revenue, but at the same time, need to be operationalized, implemented, and supported by staff. And if it's one more thing that gets incorporated into an already existing overloaded job, it becomes more and more problematic. It is not as if there is not a desire to take a look at opportunities, but it really becomes the balancing act as to how much you take on and how effective you can be. If you can't be effective at doing something, I'm not saying, it's just, that's where some of this comes
Goes
down
back to
to.
number
And sometimes one year
Goes
wouldn't be
back
the
to
year to
number
do
two.
it.
Well, and the
By
other
the next.
challenge is too,
Exactly.
just
Right?
understanding the justification for it and having a reasonable conversation with the people who are going to be impacted, not only internally, but externally, the businesses.
Yeah.
What's the reason, the genesis for doing this?
A lot of what MTRAC recommends puts extra pressure on the businesses, which, we're looking for funding,
like
but
And it
to,
puts extra pressure on the staff.
Ran 'em.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so there has to be an acknowledgement that all of these ideas may be good, but there needs to be an understanding of the tolerance and the elasticity in being able to implement it, both on the businesses as well as on City Hall.
Yes.
And so, I just say that not to get on a soapbox, but it's not always just because we look at it in black and white and it makes sense from our perspective from revenue, fully appreciate and respect that, but at the same time, I'm an operations person, so I look at it from that perspective and say, what is it going to take to lift this?
But I guess, Dennis, going back to number two, is that something that, as MTRAC puts forward some of these ideas, what the potential impact financially could be, though?
Yeah.
And that's
Because
been done, yeah.
That may I'm saying even at this level, because if it's not beneficial, then why waste council's time? If we end up saying, we really think this is going to generate this much revenue, but how much is it going to cost to do this? Maybe it's not worth even bringing it forward.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Well, and there's both a qualitative and quantitative aspect to it.
May
Correct,
cost-
but I'm saying
may-
Yeah.
Very little cost if it saves some kid from getting hurt.
Number 11 is actually being done in a sort of an informal way by the administration, because that concept is being, did I pass you one?
we were short.
Oh,
It's
okay.
okay, over your shoulder.
That's actually being rolled in by both the former and the current CFO. And it's really the heart of what we've been doing with that shared service. So the shared service model is actually working.
Yeah, Dennis, to reiterate on that, we have definitely found in working with Kevin that we can identify the fully loaded costs of all of the departments that the
I
city
know.
has.
Yeah, I know,
We-
that's a big step forward.
A part of our discussion today did touch on the fact that MTRAC may want to look at the overall health of the different utilities so that we have an understanding of how much taxpayer money is being used to support the different utilities versus how much of it is being funded from the
And
operations.
that's recommendation number, where is it? Recovering utilities costs. in there somewhere.
8 or 9?
That's, oh, yeah, item 8.
It's sort of tied into 8, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I'm suggesting is that when, for example, when we did the beach tag review, we agreed with the recommendations, but we don't really know the financial impact on the utility. So I'd like to, for example, on beach tags, I'd like to look at the utility itself and see how close are we to being at least break even.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay?
Yeah, we could do that. Number 12 is the thing that we really ought to ask the council again whether they want to do this and whether or not they want to do it this year or at all. Because it made the most sense to us to do it that way. First of all, the fees are stale. Secondly, we need the comfort of knowing that every other year there will be an inflationary adjustment on the fees, so that we don't have to argue about it every year.
Yeah, it's like a cult.
Yeah, so I think we'll ask the council to reconsider that one as well. And the parking thing, we'll let that go for a while. We're getting worn out with that parking issue, aren't we? Let me ask you, let me throw two issues in front of you for some new ideas to consider. One of them is Governor Murphy's proposal to revamp the alcoholic beverage control licensing process. He introduced a bill back in March that would essentially, well, do a lot of things with the ABC licensure, but in effect, it would loosen up the regulatory and encourage more and more licenses to be distributed. The caps on licenses, we're capped with the license, as you probably know. We can have no more than what we had in 1944, which was when that law was introduced. We have 22 licenses in town right now. Under Murphy's, 22. Under Murphy's proposal, he wants to phase out the cap on that, because the cap is that you can only have one license for every 3,000 people in your town. He wants to eliminate that, which basically would suggest that any number of licenses are available to be given out. Whoever wants one can have one, ultimately. The revenue that we get as a city from the alcoholic beverage licenses is capped also. We can't charge more than $2,500 a year for that. And our net revenue from those ABC licenses is $55,000 a year, which is about half the cost of one policeman.
That end of it's low.
Huh?
That's low.
Yeah, right. ABC licenses don't pay the mercantile fee, they don't pay the parking fee, and they don't pay the tourism fee. So in terms of a revenue flow from alcoholic beverage licensees into the general fund to support municipal services is pretty sparse. And if you suggest, and if Murphy is going to be suggesting that removing the cap would mean any number of licenses can be given out at any time, unless we do something about that licensing fee, we're going to experience a tremendous degree of enforcement demand without the resources behind it.
Another big part of his plan, I was trying to remind myself, was after 5 years, no license could be sold privately, effectively rendering current liquor licenses worthless.
That's only because, that's, in the bill, he talks about the pocket licenses. They talk about, what a pocket license is. And what he is also suggesting is that the pocket licenses expire after a certain time, but that if you have a pocket license, you can sell it to another individual or another municipality. So the pocket licenses, which may be stuck up in Morris River Township, maybe they have 2 or 3, they're not being used, they could sell them to somebody in Cape May. So,
And this had a lot to do with the beer and wineries also, I think.
yeah, well, the wineries were the first. They've got their whole statutory structure. What he also wants to do, another thing he wants to do is set up the brewery,
Correct.
make the breweries have the same kind of deal as the wineries. And so down the road, they passed a bill which was amended. Murphy didn't get everything he wanted, but they did pass a bill that's on his desk for signature right now that will give him some of that stuff, not the cap, not the removal of the cap, and not the transferability of licenses. It's more toward the breweries. But he has said in the state of the state that he's going to actively pursue the rest of the package. So we can look forward to that in the future because,
Or the enforcement of it.
yeah. Because our revenue stream with respect to alcoholic beverage licenses is anemic. And if he has his plans and they take place over the next 4 or 5 years, that the demand for enforcement is going to be significantly increased without an increase in revenue.
So Dennis, that's a great example of where that local sales tax could come in. We are allowed to
Thank you, Marty.
charge that sales tax on alcoholic beverages sales.
Thank you. That is the connection. That is another reason why it's important to consider.
Anywhere that the law is not keeping up with what's fair and just is a place where that can be a solution.
You're right. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. There's no question about it.
But the city of Cape May doesn't have, like, a lot of this legislation, what I'm reading, impacts breweries, cideries, craft distilleries. How many do we have in the city of Cape May?
That's the current,
You have
that's
none,
the
right?
current bill on his desk.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you for coming. Thanks. Oh, that's the bill on his desk. What he's going to try and get in is the second half. His original proposal, all of that stuff about licensure was taken out of this bill. Right. He's going to try.
It's not anything we need to worry about now. but
No.
For the future,
That's
something.
For the
That's
future,
my
it's
point.
going to be a problem, because he's going to put that back in there.
Well,
Yeah,
the
it was
wineries
initially
can bring
started
their
out for the
wine
breweries,
into
'cause they were
certain
like-
restaurants, and that's, I don't understand.
Well, this new one, yeah.
And the other issue I wanted you to be aware of, which we'll look at going forward, is the notion of development fees. We have 2 sections of our code which. Development fees. We have 2 sections of our code which speak about development fees. One of them is the one that's dealing with the construction office and the building, the code offices. And the other one is in affordable housing. Now, in affordable housing, development fees in the code office are capped by statute to be only the amount of money necessary to carry out the function of the code office.
Of the what?
Of the code office. They can't charge more than their actual operating costs, which is okay, except for one thing. We don't know what the actual operating cost is. And this is another issue which we need to put our program-based budgeting back in play, because we need to really understand how much it costs to run the construction office, top to bottom. So this is another issue, like the shared service issue, that we're going to have to look at, I think, to make sure that the fees that we charge in the construction office are in fact doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the other development fee in our code is the one related to affordable housing. Now, that's a fee that gets assessed to builders, some builders, in order to create an affordable housing fund for the use of the city to support affordable housing. Across the state, there's a third developmental fee that is employed by some towns, and that's a development fee which compensates the city for infrastructure impact.
Aren't some of those fees state regulated?
The Uniform Construction Code is.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah, and it's not regulated as much on the affordable housing. It's not regulated as much as it's monitored. But in some towns, they have taken the developmental fee concept and applied it to infrastructure impact. So when you take a piece of property and build 12 homes on it, that impacts your infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Sewer, water.
Yeah.
Curbs, all that
sidewalks,
stuff.
yeah.
And we've never done that.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
CDDs, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common practice across the country.
Florida.
And all this stuff is states and cities that do it already.
Well, the planning board can control some of that, too.
Control somewhat.
Well, some of the things they have to do when they do a development,
Yeah,
sidewalks,
oh, yeah,
curbs,
that's part of the
all that
negotiated
stuff.
approval process.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that we ought to take a look at some of these cities in New Jersey that actually already have ordinances which say that a development fee based on square footage or based on infrastructure impact would have to be paid by a builder in addition to the others, because those infrastructure elements are the things that are falling apart right now. Water and sewer, we're ready to get a big deal going with the water and the sewer.
Yeah, the desal plant?
Yeah, the desal plant, all that stuff factors back in, and if we're taking houses that have 1 bedroom and 1 bath and replacing them with houses that have 6 bedrooms and 6.5 baths, that's the impact on the infrastructure that we need to compensate for. If we don't, then the ratepayers, the current ratepayers in the city, will be the ones financing that development.
So I don't know enough about, but is that considered development? Because if they're just doing one, house replacement for one house replacement, I always thought the term development meant multi-dwellings
No,
on
in
a
some of
property.
the
Okay.
city ordinances, they don't say like a tract of homes.
Okay, so they would say something like, if you took down a home that previously occupied 1,500 square feet
Right.
and replaced it with a home that was above a
Yeah.
certain percentage or a certain square footage?
Yes.
Either one, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, so I think we ought to, if you want, we could pursue this issue as a new issue for 2024, if that's okay with you folks.
So you're saying, just so I'm clear, you're saying, Dennis, that a builder today pays a fee for affordable housing to help fund a fund for affordable housing?
Right.
Do we know how much that is?
It's not a lot.
Not a lot.
I thought it was based on the cost of the project. Like, there's some computation
The
that's
formula.
done behind the scenes. I don't know exactly what it is, Russ, but I think it's, if you do an addition or you do a building, there's some amount of money that's
In
apportioned.
addition, nothing for COA on
Really interesting. Well, yeah, I did.
construction.
Yeah, I did. So,
And then the other fee the other fee would be an infrastructure fee.
so that's the problem.
Yeah,
2022.
I
We-
understand
we-
that, but.
We currently,
Don't they today
I'll
pay
talk offline.
in New Jersey, what I felt was 2.5% of equalized assessed value of land and improvements today?
that's affordable housing.
That's the affordable housing
Yeah.
fund? Oh,
Yeah, that goes to the Affordable Housing Fund.
decent.
But that's for,
We all know how that money gets used. So anyway, if it's the committee's pleasure, we could pursue that issue to see whether or not it's a doable thing, whether it's advisable, what it would look like as a draft, or not. It's up to you guys.
Honestly, I don't think I know enough about it to say, or enough not to say whether or not it's a good idea or not, to be honest.
Well, let's begin with the gross premise that as Cape May gets built up, the infrastructure demands are going to be multiplied by the size of developments.
So from that logic, it would make sense that we would need to understand the implications
Yeah.
of taking a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath house,
Yeah,
and we
I
all said that,
I mean-
and replacing it with a house that was, 50 to, percent larger or greater, and what the implications would be.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what's the philosophy of the city? Is that what they want?
Right,
Yeah.
I
exactly.
mean,
right.
does the city want big housing, all these
Well, yeah,
little ones torn down, et cetera?
I
Well, I think
the-
that's a separate issue.
is.
Yeah.
That is
I-
a separate,
yeah,
and I think
it is,
that,
but-
that cow's already out of the barn.
I agree, but I guess, again, it's whether you're going to encourage it or.
Yeah, I mean, basically, everybody says, and it's hard to argue with, if you have a piece of property, you can
Agreed.
do what you want with it.
But
Within the
again-
confines of the rules, nobody has a problem with that, I don't think, except the next door neighbor.
So you're saying right now, Dennis, you believe other communities do pay,
There are other
other
communities,
communities have this infrastructure
Yeah.
fee?
yeah.
Well, it seems like it's worth looking into, because nobody's building smaller homes. They're either expanding on their properties.
Carteret?
Carteret,
Yeah,
something else.
yeah.
Okay, I didn't know
Yeah.
that was.
I think Steve's trying to say something.
Yeah, and I was going to say, yeah, just that, I think it's certainly worth looking into, because you're seeing houses still being torn down, and nobody's building a smaller home or the same size home.
Yeah.
So everything we've looked at is stressing infrastructure, so it's certainly worth looking at for,
Right.
to bear some of those costs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the logical,
And I
starting
think it's
point.
also clearly within the charge of MTRAC, too.
Yeah, and I
Do
think
we
that
know
if
if any shore communities do it?
I could check for you, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if someplace like Ocean City or Sea Isle, who have kind of gone, were ahead of us in a lot of this,
Yeah.
where a lot of those small homes were torn down and, big side-by-sides were put up.
We may be too late on this one, especially like if you look at Sea Isle. It's too late for Sea Isle.
Yeah,
And
it's way too late.
Ocean City.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And right now, well, we have no, land left, but we still have blocks with small houses on them.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think to your point, you're tearing down a 2-bedroom, 1-bath to put up a 6-bedroom, 6-bath, it's definitely impacting.
Yeah.
You can look at entire blocks, and you've seen them going down one by one,
But the other phenomenon that you don't see in the other towns, like Sea Isle or Ocean City, but you do see it in Cape May, is that large lots are getting subdivided and 2 houses are being put on it, which is a clear doubling of the impact on
Oh, they did that in Sea Isle, I can tell you, because they used to have small, single homes, and they put those 2 side-by-side big duplexes
oh, that
next
was
to
on
them.
one lot, but we have in town, we have large lots.
Oh, large lot, yeah.
Yeah, like in Washington, next to
Yeah.
the tennis courts.
Yep.
Okay, so those 2 issues we'll add to our agenda for 2024. Any questions, any comments?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just,
Russ?
Yeah, I have one.
Hey, a comment from Russ. How unusual.
He's such a
Dennis,
quiet guy.
Dennis,
Go ahead, Russ.
Dennis, I've been with you right from the start, bud. So Mike, I guess going back to your, the things to go back to city council on, and I know you've got, well, I guess really it's down to 5, since one really isn't the city council, it's the state or the federal government, but rather than go back and just say, look, we'd like you to consider all 5, shouldn't we prioritize it? And let me, as an example, suggest that the regular inflationary adjustment of mercantile fees, given the fact that a lot of those fees are 15-plus years old,
Yeah.
would seem to be something that someone looking at it should be able to say, well, yeah, if they've been around for 15 years and we haven't adjusted it, I mean, that, we're not looking at huge adjustments. I mean, you're taking
We're not.
$5 to $10.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But just, that seems to be a pretty easy one to consider. And then the other, which was one of the first ones that you said, is that this fiscal impact analysis. Because, again, that makes some sense. I mean, why wouldn't you do a fiscal impact analysis? Although I agree with Mary, we should do a fiscal impact analysis
Well, at
for
least have an understanding before we.
what the understanding before we spend a lot of time on it here, so I'm with you on that. But, I don't know, I just went through it quickly. It just seemed like those might be a little easier no-brainers than some of the other stuff that we have.
I think the mercantile licenses would be easy to implement, and I also think that the businesses would be understanding of that. The local sales tax has a lot of people up in arms, but an increase in their mercantile fee, which hasn't changed in 15 to 20 years.
You can't fight that.
It's hard to
Like,
fight
that
that,
makes
isn't it?
Even the bid board increased their
Whereas the sales tax has a lot more potential.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the sales tax issue, the local sales tax issue, we'll call it, is a good, it'll either sink or swim based on how much value we get from it in areas that we're not funding now, which is, and really, it's not a question of saving property taxes. It's a question of funding tourist-related stuff for the benefit of the commercial sector, not the residential sector. That's where the money ought to go.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's not a good idea to consider longer term, but just seems like the other is so easy, and it's
Yeah.
almost like a no-brainer.
I agree with you.
And, you know, that's all that was my only recommendation, is maybe you ought to think about prioritization of this, and which,
Oh, that's a
and
good idea.
Marie might be able to give you some direction as to which ones would the city council be more.
It's a good idea, because if you just put 5 things on a piece of paper, then there's 5 reasons why people say, well, you know, which one are we supposed to be looking at now? Because all 5 of them can't necessarily all be done at the same time.
Yep.
So if there's a.
Prioritizing those 2 is a good idea.
Yeah, if you do that, then people say, okay, let's focus on it, and really, is this, you know, does this make sense? I think logically, from a business standpoint, you know, no one could argue that if you haven't increased fees and you haven't kept up with inflationary factors, things should be. On the other side of it, I don't know the implications of any of that. So I can't speak to what that looks like or what that means, either from the financial office or from the clerk's office. So I can't pretend to, you know, say.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's prioritize it, ask the
Yeah,
question.
Implementing it, I don't think it would be as hard as implementing a new thing, because all we're really doing is saying the same fee, the same license is there, the fee's now going to be this instead of that.
But Dennis,
You
there's
did,
systems.
as part of it, though, you said, ideally, you could simplify it for the office by remember that?
Yeah.
And consolidating it.
So,
Sorry?
We haven't gotten there yet.
We
no,
haven't gotten there yet, but
okay,
I'm saying
no.
over
Can
time,
I-
that would be another thing to do to make it easier for the.
There were numbers thrown around.
Can I,
from the business.
can I just say that the council was provided a report by the clerk, which we all have, which talked to, addressed, and analyzed that information. So we were, that was shared with us as council.
What, the vendor?
Yes, and there are views and opinions from the people who are doing the work, who understand how it functions. I just want to mention on the other part, but I think I lost my train of thought, on the fees. There was something else I was going to share. There are 2 components to it. Keep in mind, it's not as simple. There are 2 systems that get used for this, both SDL and Edmunds. So having to recode just for something as simple as changing fees does require work. So I'm not trying to push back, I'm just trying to, I am finding.
It's not just an Excel spreadsheet where you come back.
No, no, I would, so actually, I am going to be sitting down, and I am going to sit with the clerk's office staff to learn how the process works, what it looks like, because I'm just that, you know, that's how I can best educate myself, and then be able to articulate to you when I'm trying to explain, you know, why something can't happen immediately or why it hasn't happened, because there are reasons, and it's not for lack of will. It is just sometimes, one, they did the analysis, and I just had this conversation with Erin today and have the document, and the second piece is understanding their justification and reasoning for it. But there is more than one system that is used for this, so that complicates things, and it was something I learned today also myself. So I don't think it's necessarily that council's not saying don't do it. There is the difference between making policy decisions and then operationalizing them. That is my area of expertise, and I understand that. And so we don't direct operations. Even as council, we don't do that. I mean, I don't think that that's my role. You know, what I do is make, you know, recommendations, but I listen to the people who are doing the work and elicit their feedback and response, and know, you know, whether or not they have the ability to, and feel it's the best way to manage the business.
Well, and that goes back to the fiscal responsibility, what's involved in it.
Right.
But also it helps you understand whether or not it's a
So
whole new
I've
system.
just had this conversation today with Erin, and plan to do that, just so I have a better understanding of what it takes for them to do the work. It's not a defensive posture, it's just, I think I just need
No,
to have that
I don't-
information.
I don't
Yeah.
need you to be in a defensive posture.
Yeah, yeah.
But from where I'm sitting, what I'm concerned with is that we made that proposal to council, was it August, September, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And with enough, and we said at that time, we need lead time to implement this thing properly. And that's why we did it then.
And Dennis, I don't know that it has not been taken, it's not part of the budget process for '24. To be perfectly honest, because I haven't gotten the budget. I don't know what has been going on behind the scenes. So, you
Yeah,
know.
that's right. I mean, I get that. Okay.
Yeah, so I think in all fairness, you know, I don't know what analysis has been done. I don't know what changes may be forthcoming. I just knew on the mercantile, I just happened to have and got into a little bit more in-depth conversation with Erin about this.
So you saying that that shouldn't be one of our top 2 priorities?
No, it should be. I would say keep it on the list. I think I'm now trying to get it to the top of my list to start looking at and have a better understanding. So,
I
Perhaps
got a
we
little
can
lost.
have-
Dennis, when you said we made a recommendation in August, September, what was the topic?
On the 2%, the
to have a
two-year,
more,
the across-the-board increase in fees and
Okay.
the 2-year escalator.
And Maureen, you're saying that the finding that we had as a committee from the work that we did on the short-term rental licenses on simplifying the code, that's already gone forward, even though we haven't put anything forward as a committee yet?
no, what I'm saying to you is that there was an analysis done by the clerk's office on the consolidation of codes, and they came back with a recommendation, and talking with Erin, I'm only paraphrasing, I had a quick conversation. They looked at it at her office, her staff, the people who are involved, and they don't see the value right now without doing a wholesale, complete, start from scratch on changing how the code structure is for those.
Quite honestly, for that particular one, that was more to try to simplify things. If it ends up not simplifying it,
Yeah.
I don't think it was as important.
And without a lot of re-engineering, both in the system and, you know, she said that did not present itself as being something of value added for them.
Doesn't simplify it for them,
Yeah,
then-
yeah.
So what I'm saying is, we still have a pending report to council on the short-term mercantile licenses, on the short-term rental licenses from last season.
Right.
Okay? And a part of that was that observation that we could simplify things. You're saying that's already gone forward, so we can take that out.
What I'm saying to you is that she provided a report to council.
Yep.
Okay, as the city clerk does.
On rentals.
No,
No.
I just got it this afternoon, that's okay. And it's a summary of all of the fees and the categorizations.
Oh, okay.
In my conversation with her, and please, was literally before I got here, she said, Maureen, we did a review, I sat with my staff, looked at it, consolidation of fees, the consolidation of the codes, sorry, let me be clear. She did not consider to be of a quality move at this point.
Right, so we won't make the recommendation.
Right,
Because it's already been brought
Yes.
forward.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. So that was all net news to me today, okay? And then what I've said to her is, I do want to sit down and have an understanding of the process from beginning to end. Because as we discuss it here, in all fairness, none of us really understand what it takes to do the work.
No,
And so
no.
to me, that's
So
kind
the-
of, you
so
know, I
but
feel
the-
like I
So
should
the
know.
focus really is just on an increase because it's been 15-plus years.
Right. And I cannot say whether or not that has happened or not happened. I have not seen a budget for 2024.
Perhaps the city manager could join us and let us know if it's something he's considering for the 2024
That's a good
budget,
idea.
or someone from licensing.
Well,
That's a good
yeah.
idea, yeah.
Most of the budgeting right now is in Kevin's shop, you know, because he was doing, yeah. So, I mean, you know,
Maybe
yeah,
Kevin can come back.
right. No, it's just a fair question. I'm just saying, I don't know if it was done or not, because we sort of get the
Well,
budget
listen,
after it's done.
our next meeting is a month from now. By that time, a lot of work will have been done on this. It's not done now. And Kevin can come back and give us.
Yeah, he may be able to provide you with an update.
Yeah, unfortunately, vacant is really vacant next month.
I am not going to be here either.
Can't be here
Are
next
you
month.
going to be here?
No, not for the February meeting, no.
Really? And you're not going to be here?
I'm taking my southerly trip next month.
I'll talk for the two of us.
Steve, you want to talk
Why don't you find
I
out?
don't think I can make up for Maureen, but I'll try and talk a little more.
Yeah, talk a little more. Say whatever you want.
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
I do have one quick question. You said for the local sales tax, you said targeted for tourism-related activities. That would be what we would spend the funds on, not what would be taxed.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah. The revenue from the tax.
right, okay,
would
just
go
wanted
to
to
that.
clarify
Yeah, dedicated.
for my constituents.
Yes, good. Oh, well, it's clearly not going to work unless it goes right that way, yeah.